All praise is due to God, the Lord of the world, and may his peace and mercy be on Muhammad, the trustworthy. I seek refuge with God from the accursed devil. In the name of God, the most gracious, the ever merciful. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going over the article, Islam and the State, a Counter-Narrative. In some of the previous sessions, I had mentioned that this counter-narrative is in fact a response to the traditional narrative of our religious scholars. I had mentioned the main points of that traditional narrative at the very beginning of this lecture series. Subsequently, I have also presented my point of view in the form of well laid out points. So far, we have discussed 8 of those points. Now we shall move on to the 9th point. But before this, I would like to draw your attention to certain facts. I'm sure you will recollect that when we started looking into this counter-narrative, we passed by one particular passage. That passage was as follows. This understanding actually constitutes a counter-narrative. It has been repeatedly pointed out by us that when in a Muslim society chaos develops as a result of religious beliefs, then the remedy does not lie in an advocacy of secularism. On the contrary, the solution lies in presenting a counter-narrative to the existing narrative based on religion. In this passage, I have used the word secularism, and I have stated that this interpretation will not work in a Muslim society. Right now, in the Muslim society, there exists a large class of scholars with a distinct religious narrative and the people who agree with them. In contrast to this, the counter-narrative of a significant portion of our modern educated class also exists, which can be expressed in one word, secularism. If you pay attention to whatever I have stated so far, it is entirely a rejection of the narrative put forward by our scholars. I have said that the message of Islam is primarily addressed to individuals and that it does not give any instruction concerning the state. The directives it has given to the society are also addressed to those individuals who are fulfilling their responsibilities as the leaders of Muslims. State, as the term is used in political theory, is not the addressee of Islam. In terms of its implications, my position appears similar to what the proponents of secularism say, that the state should have no relation with religion. Therefore, they have no quarrel with me as regards the consequences of my view, yet my reasoning is purely based on religion. The secularists, however, will ignore my reasoning and approve of the conclusions, whereas in the way in which I had articulated my viewpoint, I had made it clear that I am talking about the modern nation state. In creating this state, I played no part. It was formed by a certain historical process. So the proponents of secularism may not have any difference with me on this point. Therefore, when Maulana Taqi Usmani wrote an article in response to my narrative, this is the issue he tried to highlight. He said that Mr. Ghamdi's narrative appeared confused to him and was full of contradictions. Mr. Ghamdi has stated in the beginning that the state has no religion, and later on he has mentioned a number of religious directives. How then will these directives be fulfilled? In response, I wrote another article explaining the difference between state and government. For example, we are the citizens of the state of Pakistan. The government can be of People's Party or Nawaz Sharif's Muslim League or Imran Khan's PTI or of some other party. The parties come up with their manifestos and present their viewpoints. They get the public mandate, according to which they have a right to enact any law in the country, but they do not have an exclusive right on the state. It belongs to all its citizens. The state cannot be owned by the Muslim League even though they have the majority. Similarly, the state cannot be owned by the people of only one religious outlook. Else, one could just change the nature of the state itself. That is why I had to explain the different types of states there are and how they affect this whole debate. First, there is the type of state that exists in the Arabian Peninsula whose nature has been determined by God. There is no debate about it. Second, the type of states that came into existence through conquest and whose boundaries would be determined by their conquerors. Large empires came into existence in this way. In these states, the inhabitants are subservient to the rulers. However, modern nation-states are not founded on this principle. In these states, the matters of governance will be discussed by the people, and Islam has also provided certain directives about governance, or in other words, Muslim rulers are bound by certain directives from God. Therefore, I have stated that the religious class objected to my position, and quite understandably so, because I was refuting their point of view, but the secularists had no objection to it. Let us now see the second point. When I said that countries in which Muslims are in majority can unite under a single rule, this is a political, not a religious statement. It can be my dream and the dream of every Muslim, but caliphate is not a religious term. In terms of its implications, it was acceptable for the proponents of secularism, even though my argument was based on religion. In other words, I was trying to say that had this been a directive of religion, I would have submitted to it. I do not see religion through the lenses of the philosophy of secularism or liberalism. I see the world through the lens of religion. If the religion had said so, I would have had no objection to it, because then it would have had its reasons and arguments, and they would have been satisfying to me, and God would have explained the reason for such a directive. But no such directive exists. If Muslims wish, they can form a united government, or they can remain as independent nation-states, or they may adopt any other system. Religion would have no objection to it. It is not the concern of Islam, nor has Islam discussed this topic. Obviously, the proponents of caliphate who are working for this cause, or explaining the system of caliphate to the Muslims, or consider the establishment of Islam to be based on the establishment of caliphate, will object to my assertions. So, this also was a departure from the religious narrative of the Muslim scholarship. If you disregard my line of reasoning and only focus on the conclusion, the secular groups may have no objection to it. The third point was related to the issue of nationality, that the basis of nationality is not Islam. The proponents of secularism and liberalism, or the people who are not interested in religion, might not pay attention to my assertion that the relationship between Muslims is not based on nationhood but on brotherhood. They would be fine with it and say that it is a personal matter to consider Muslims as brothers. At the very least, this rids us of religion-based nationalism. In other words, they would find the idea of Muslims establishing a state based on nationality rather than religion satisfying and with nothing objectionable in it. I responded to the objections raised by religious people concerning this point and explained that God's religion has a different stance on this matter. It only establishes the relationship of brotherhood between Muslims, and this relationship has its own set of demands, which I explained in my article. Then we discussed the fourth point, wherein I stated that no individual or group or government has a right to excommunicate people or decide whether they are believers or disbelievers. Faith or disbelief is based on a person's or a group's own admission. Our relationship with people is that of calling them toward Islam and sharing our point of view. We can only attempt to clarify their error, caution them, teach them, and invite their attention to the correct position. Even the state has no authority to intervene beyond this domain. The secularists would also be satisfied with this position in terms of its consequences. I would again like to say that a line of reasoning is different from the result. Usually, the common people are not interested in the validity and invalidity of the arguments as much as they are interested in the outcomes of an approach. They only see whether the outcome is acceptable to them or not. So, The fatwas people usually throw at different groups and thereby create divisions within the Muslim, or the act of persecuting a group or framing discriminatory laws about them. All this would come to an end, because then deciding the religious affiliations or religious viewpoints of people or measuring the faith of a Muslim would be none of our business. The fifth point discussed the issue of polytheism, disbelief, and apostasy. These are indeed serious offenses, but no one has the right to punish people in this world on account of these crimes. As a result, a person who doesn't accept a religion would not be interested in what happens in the next life. He would be least bothered about people's beliefs in the punishments of the next life, for the matters of this life would at least be ameliorated. In other words, no one would resort to persecution here. So the benefit they get from this view is that they are able to maintain their social identity as a Muslim, but at the same time they are able to do any shirk they want or even express their disbelief in private gatherings. This gives rise to a sort of liberal society, and I have already stated that this is not against the will of God. God repeatedly states that He has given this right to the people. Many of our thinkers question the idea of allowing people the right to accept or reject faith without any distinction. They object to this freedom, but the Quran has stated exactly the same thing in the words, "Whoever wants can profess faith, and whoever wants can reject it." People will be invited to the correct beliefs. The message will be delivered to them, and they will be warned about the consequences of conscious disbelief in the hereafter. So, this position is acceptable to the secularists as well, because the religious offenses are only three, viz. Polytheism, disbelief, and apostasy, and the Quran dissociates them from state affairs. And the proponents of secularism will naturally feel comfortable with this position. The sixth point was concerning jihad. I am using the word jihad, which obviously is a religious term. The Quran has declared it to be a sacred obligation, but it is aimed at fighting persecution. The collective conscience of the world also agrees with this aim. If it is said that jihad is carried out to convert people to Islam or to establish the political supremacy of Islam, then it does become a controversial topic. But when we say that jihad is carried out to fight oppression and tyranny, it coincides with the globally agreed principle of war. If the UN permits military action anywhere, it would also be based on the same principle. The permission to take military action against Afghanistan was given by the UN General Assembly. But on what principle was this permission based? I am not discussing whether the action was right or wrong, but only that it was based on the acceptance of this principle that oppression and tyranny is a valid reason to launch a war. Again, the proponents of secularism will not have any problems with this position, because in terms of the results, this approach also achieves the same objective that they desire. In the seventh point, I mentioned the ethical limits of jihad, and I stated that jihad can only be carried out against combatants. This is just an extension of the sixth point, and therefore this also does not invite any opposition from the secularists. The eighth and the final point was that the collective system of Muslims will be a democratic one. In other words, the right to establish the government does not belong to a particular class of people. It is not just the prerogative of the Muslim scholars or a particular class of virtuous people. Rather, Muslims will also adopt the same principle of governance that is accepted globally by everyone. So these are the 8 points because of which some people tried to give the impression that my narrative was actually promoting secularism. I myself clarified this and said that in terms strictly of consequences, this observation is undoubtedly correct. It produces similar results. However, my line of reasoning is entirely different and is based on religion. The religion that I follow leads me to this conclusion. Now, let us proceed to the 9th point, and this is where I part ways with the proponents of secularism. Until now, my difference was with the Muslim scholarship. I have rejected their narrative on each and every point What also becomes clear is the role that this narrative can play in the intellectual and ideological struggle well underway in the Muslim world. If the people were to understand its implications, what I can only call this religious lobby is standing diametrically opposed to my views as far as these 8 points are concerned. It is also standing diametrically opposed to the whole world. If you see closely, they advocate the same narrative that is giving rise to the movements in which people, in desperation, have taken up arms, are engaged in relentless killing, and in which different groups within Muslims are killing each other. They are also fighting their own governments. The same narrative is operating behind all this. I have already elucidated its different aspects. Now, on the 9th point, I part ways with secularism. In fact, I have to explain the gravity of the mistake the proponents of secularism are committing regarding Muslim societies. What they are promoting can never be acceptable in a Muslim society. I will explain the reasons later as we proceed further. I will also explain the religious arguments for my position because I take religion as the basis of my argumentation. So, obviously, I would first state the position of Islam on this issue and then demonstrate how this position complies with the demands of reason. This is the story so far. That is, nothing in it is objectionable according to the demands of reason and knowledge. This is what our religion states. A question that can be raised by the scholars and their associates is that if what I have said is true, does Islam only remain a personal matter of an individual like Christianity? Has Islam not given any directives concerning the Muslim collective life? Had it been so, that is, had Islam not given any directive concerning the Muslim collectivity or Muslim authorities, I would have also held the same view. Then it could have been said that there is no difference between my position and that of secularism or liberalism. In fact, I have never used the words secularism and liberalism, except so far as I wish to reject them. The reason is the same. When I will discuss this issue, my position will become amply clear. Those who are prone to see the world in terms of black and white find it very difficult to understand my position. For them, if you are in favor of an Islamic state or caliphate, then you are a Muslim, standing with the Muslims. Or more properly, it can be said that you are a proponent of Islamism. And if you deny this relationship of the state with religion, then you are a proponent of secularism. I do not support either of these positions. Therefore, I had urged you in the introduction itself to pay attention to this point. It is at this point that I part ways with the advocates of liberalism and secularism. The idea that all humans have been created by God, all are the children of Adam and Eve. Humans cannot be discriminated on the basis of their birth. Religion is a message and an invitation. God has sent this message through His prophets. One day, all of us have to face God. No one has the right to pass judgment on a person in this world. We can only deliver the message to others. None of this is objectionable to anyone. The proponents of any religion or viewpoint can say similar things about their religion, but nothing should be imposed on anyone. The matter is pretty clear up to this point and doesn't create any differences. But beyond this, the same question comes up that I had raised earlier. Does my religion give any instruction concerning the collective life of individuals? If it does give such a directive, what is it and how does it relate to the state and government? What would be its nature? Or am I saying something paradoxical? I've just referred to Mufti Taqi Usmani's write-up in which he has spent all his energy to prove this, although what I had said was pretty straightforward. And one of our intellectuals even remarked that Mufti Taqi Usmani had indeed given a fitting response to me. I do not know how it was a fitting response because my point of view was not even discussed in that article. My article had 10 points. For the response to be fitting, Each point should have been evaluated with proper arguments based on religious texts, but this did not happen. If Muslims form a government somewhere, can it completely dissociate itself from religion if it accepts the points I have discussed earlier? If it is so, then people should clearly say that we agree with the idea of secularism. But I do not accept this position because the religion I believe in does not accept it, and the established criteria of reason and knowledge do not accept this position as well. A system is always based on the will of the people. I have already explained in the previous point that people shall decide what kind of rulers and what kind of government they want to establish. An idea cannot be imposed on the people, or they cannot be bound to an idea before they take that decision. They have the right to change their rulers. They have the right to vote for a party with a particular manifesto at one time and the next time vote for some other party with a different manifesto. Human thoughts do tend to evolve and change. Therefore, I do not agree with permanently binding a state to a certain idea. A nation-state can have a particular character, and if the nature of the state changes as a result of some historical process, that also can be analyzed for things that are valid and invalid in it. But as for the nation-states that exist today, I have clearly stated that Muslims can live in them, whether they are in a majority or minority. They can establish their identities based on them and express their nationality also. Islam has no objection to any of this. If they want to strive for a caliphate or for a united Islamic state, it is all right. Please go ahead and form it. If the political situation is conducive, the historical process allows for it, and if you have a strong resolve. If a person is peacefully struggling to achieve it, even after knowing it is impossible, I will still not object. He has this right. We can debate whether this objective, for which the person is struggling, is even practical or not, but there will be no religious discussion about it. We can take a clear position in this matter by saying that Muslims can pursue any of these objectives if they want. But among the nation-states that exist at present, does our religion provide any directives about the government formed in them? My answer is the negative. So, the issue should be resolved. What is the real issue with the people in our midst who are influenced by secularism and liberalism? They are basically two issues with them, one apparent and the other concealed. Their inner problem is that a good number of them have actually no real belief in religion. Please note that I am not commenting on the inner convictions of any person. There is a good number of them who confess it themselves when you talk to them. I am not pronouncing any judgment on them. They themselves accept it. They will tell you that they do not care for God or the hereafter. Nevertheless, they are called Muslims, live in the Muslim society, are buried according to Muslim custom, and Muslims offer funeral prayers upon them. They do not like to be separated from the Muslim society, so this group exists. But among them also are people who state that they are Muslims. Sometimes they offer prayers, keep the fast, believe in the hereafter, but then they say that human experience has taught them that the modern nation state should be secular in the ultimate sense of the word. In my view, these people are not only taking a wrong position from the religious perspective, but in terms of their objectives also, they are actually fighting a lost battle. When the ideas of secularism and liberalism developed in the West, they were targeted at Christianity. But in the case of Christianity, a transformation had taken place well within a century after the passing away of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. And this transformation was not brought about by any state or government, but by their own religious leaders such as St. Paul. They had practically dissociated the law of the Torah from the Christian religion. Therefore, the whole conflict of secularism or liberalism in the West was directed against the church, and the church had no religious argument or justification for its existence. It was simply a tradition that had been established at some time in history. In this tradition, the Pope had enjoyed extraordinary power for centuries, which has been called by Will Durant as the Age of Faith. in his monumental work, The Story of Civilization. In this age, the same conditions prevailed in the entire world. In Christendom, the religious people had acquired enormous political power. Among the Shiite Muslim also, religious leaders enjoy special political powers, which has now attained constitutional status, but even before that, they more or less enjoyed political power. So the institution of papacy had no religious basis. It was simply a sort of subjugation of human beings. Therefore, the Church was unable to win this struggle, and it agreed to confine itself to the Vatican because it had no religious arguments in its support. Had the law of the Torah not been already abolished much earlier, then separation of the Church and the state could not have been possible. The Judaic law had already left the Christian psyche, and even the laws related to the individual life were not followed. Therefore, the Europeans faced no difficulty in separating the Church from the state. In our case, the secularists are trying to see our problems through the European experience. In the European case, the gospel had already been interpreted in a certain way. But here, we have the Quran before us. And in the past 14 centuries, no one in the Muslim world has even dared to form an institution like the Catholic Church, or dared to declare that some of the Islamic laws would no longer be applicable. Therefore, just as the contents of Islam, as enumerated in the Quran, are related to ethics and creed, similarly, there is one more integral part of the Quran, which is the Sharia, or the law. And any person who studies this law will find out that a large portion of laws are related to an individual, and some laws are also related to the society, government, and the Muslim collectivity. Moreover, we do not have only the translations of the Quran, but the text of the Quran is preserved in its original form, which is recited in every Muslim house. As Muslims incline more and more towards religious knowledge, they begin to study the Quran with understanding. In this scenario, who can have the goal to remove the Quran from the Muslim psyche? It is not possible. You can see the utter failure of this approach in Turkey, where secularism was declared as the state religion with full state backing. Wherever this proposal will be repeated, it will meet utter failure. Why? The reason is that the actual fight here is not between the Pope and the people, but between the Quran and the people. This fight can never be won against the Quran. Therefore, I always try to make these people understand that I am standing on a position of belief. Even if you have a political objective before you, you are fighting a lost battle. All of you must be aware of the announcement made by the Sindh government yesterday that the Friday sermon will be arranged at the state level, and this sermon will be delivered in the grand mosques. This announcement launched a debate on our news channels. I happened to watch one of the debates last night, in which our friend Mr. Salim Safi articulated the correct religious viewpoint in detail. Although there were a few things he said that he can be asked to reconsider. For example, he said that state has the right to give the sermon and take control of the grand mosques, that is, mosques meant for the Friday assembly. But the sermon shall be prepared by a committee consisting of all the Muslim schools of thought. This is a needless step because the scholars of different schools have ample opportunities to present their views everywhere. They can teach people in the mosques on any other day of the week. One of the panelists in the TV debate said that the government should never take control of the mosques, as it will be interference in the religious affairs of the people. Had I been part of the panel, I would have politely corrected this gentleman. It is the scholars who have interfered in the matters related to the government, and this is being put to an end. This was not their prerogative at all. No one is being restricted from speaking or teaching. They are free to speak anywhere they like. I am not in favor of restrictions on their speaking apart from the Friday sermon, because that is not related to the Muslim governance. Friday prayers are obligatory on me as well as you, and we all have to attend the masjid for that. If a scholar wants to teach or speak in the mosque on any other day, It is up to us whether we want to attend or not. It is their right to speak and our right to listen to the speech or not. The state has no right to put restrictions on them. But what happened in Sindh is an entirely different matter. The state is not interfering in someone's religious affairs. Rather, the right of the state that had been infringed upon is being restored to them. This is where I feel a mistake has been made. My friend Mr. Salim Safi raised an important point, but he was unable to articulate it properly. Let me tell you that when rampant killings started in Pakistan, and you already know that a lot of people have succumbed to the large-scale fighting launched in the name of jihad. When I said that jihad can only be the responsibility of a state, the secular lobby heaped praises on me because their own objectives were being fulfilled. So if you take the position that the state should not interfere in religious matters, then should it not interfere even in jihad? The Quran has clearly commanded the Muslims to do jihad. So, if I form my own battalion to do jihad, who are you to object and interfere? Therefore, you simply cannot put an end to fighting and conflict in the Muslim society unless you discuss matters with reference to religion. Here, you even need to think about using the word secularism and in what direction will it lead you. Mind you, the Quran is standing in your way. Thus, I would submit that you can never win this battle in any way. So this is the place where I part ways with these people. My position is different from them. In fact, I am standing at a different position from them in all the previous points. In other words, my religion actually points out the places where the scholars are in error. I have explained this in detail and pointed out the actual mistake of our scholars as well the correct perspective on the matter. In the 9th point, I intend to assess the mistake committed by our scholars as well as the secularists. Since our ways are about to part here from the secularists, I had to offer some prefatory comments. The 9th point is that if at some place a Muslim government exists, it is generally expected to implement the Sharia. This demand is being made in Egypt, in Malaysia, and as you know, in Pakistan also, conferences and rallies on implementing the Sharia are being organized. Parties are being formed to achieve this. A lot of people in Turkey are working towards this goal, although they are facing difficulties because of their constitution being secular in nature. But sooner or later, this demand will become prominent. The same phenomenon is seen in Morocco and other countries. I have commented precisely on this demand of implementing the Sharia, and this is where I part ways. Also, this is where I have tried to point out the flaw in the position of the traditional scholarship. I have said that this expression, implementing, is misleading. I have not said that this expression is wrong, because obviously the Sharia is part of the religion. Even I have divided my own book Meezan into 2 parts. The first part, titled Al-Hikmah, deals with creed and ethics, which is the foundation of religion. The real and immutable part of the religion proclaimed by the prophets of God comprises of beliefs and ethics. From this, what branches out is the Sharia, or the law, a usage that I have tried to resurrect with this word. Instead, Muslims generally use the word nizam, or system. That was very misleading. The word Sharia itself means law. So the second part of my book deals with the Sharia. Please go through its entire content. By God, if all the directives in those contents related solely to an individual, I would have declared so and pointed out the error of our scholars even on this point. But it is not so. Just as there are directives addressed to the individuals, we also find directives given to the Muslim society. And these latter directives are so obvious and so clear that there is no scope for any interpretation. We already discussed one of these directives, Amruhum Shura Bainahum, in the 8th point. This directive is not related to individuals. The Quran has bound us to abide by this principle while forming a government. In my view, Establishing a dictatorship in Muslim society is not just wrong politically, but it will also be a religiously incorrect step. So when General Pervez Musharraf took control of Pakistan as a dictator, the newspaper Daily Pakistan asked me for an interview. They asked me about the coup by General Musharraf, and I told them that this was a major sin. In other words, it was a religious offense. It was a violation of the rights given to the people by God, and the army had no right to do so. It was actually a breach of the contract on which this whole system rests. About the constitution also, I had stated that it was a national covenant. The teachings of our religion are completely based on fulfilling covenants with both God and men. It is a contract. The Almighty repeatedly calls on the people in the Quran to fulfill the covenant with Him. Accepting the Prophet also implies a contract of obedience. I have frequently tried to highlight this. I am saying that the expression implement the Sharia is not incorrect, but it is misleading. Thus, there is a need for change here because a word has incorrectly been used. Let me explain why. It gives an impression that Islam has given the government the right to implement all the directives of the Sharia upon the people with the full force of state power. Firstly, please understand that one part of our religion is the Sharia, that is law. There is no dispute about it. All scholars accept this, and so do I. The Sharia again has two parts. One is related to the individual and the other to the Muslim society. When you say implement the Sharia, it gives the impression that an Islamic state requires one to act like the three Islamic state experiments of the Saudi regime, the Iranian regime, and the Taliban. All three of them followed the same pattern. It is not just that I consider the expression under discussion as erroneous, but it has actually brought deleterious results to foray. Let us accept, for the sake of understanding, that our religion obligates a man to sport a beard and a woman to observe the veil. All three regimes implemented these directives, so much so that the Saudi government legislated that the women had to be accompanied by a male relation, that is mahram, to travel and could not drive a vehicle. All such directives were implemented through the state machinery. Therefore, this is the sense of the expression implementing the Sharia that the people understand. In other words, the impression received from this expression is not incorrect. When we use the expression implementing the Sharia, it gives the impression that Islam has given the right to a government to forcibly implement all the directives of the Sharia on people. I have written, the fact is that the Quran and Hadith do not give this authority to any government. Here, I am again disagreeing with the scholars and their narrative. This right is not established for the government in the Quran and the Hadith. No government has the right to intervene in a directive given by God to an individual. The decision to follow a directive has to be taken by an individual. Consider the example of the beard. If we accept that sporting the beard is obligatory in our religion, even then, it is related to an individual's decision. The state has no concern with it. If I am doing something wrong, I am answerable to God alone. But here, people are interfering in a matter between God and an individual. No one has been given this authority. In the Islamic Sharia, there are two types of rules. First, there are those which are imposed on individuals qua individuals. Second, there are those that are imposed on a Muslim society. By ignoring this division, an error has been committed by the Muslim governments that were formed in the modern era. By doing this, they created an aversion in the people's minds towards a Muslim government that would want to follow the Sharia. People are not comfortable with the government and the police excessively interfering in their lives. If it is a directive of God, then its proponents need to present evidences in its favor. And if God had indeed given such a directive, one could have even found some sound rational arguments for it. But that is not the case. In the Islamic Sharia, there are two types of rules. First, there are those which are imposed on individuals qua individuals. Second, there are those that are imposed on a Muslim society. The first category relates to directives which are between an individual and God. This is very clear from the Quran, and in fact the Quran has employed a unique style while mentioning those directives. For example, you may look up Surah Nur, where women have been informed about the manners of social interaction. In Surah 24, verse 31, a style of persuasion and exhortation has been adopted in the words, "And tell the believing women to restrain their eyes." So the first category relates to directives that are between an individual and God, and in their case, an individual is answerable only to God and not to any government. In these matters also, if a person needs to be advised, it has to be done with reference to God's commands. The same approach has to be adopted while advising a woman, if at all needed. In all such matters, one has to remain confined to counseling, education, or persuasion. So, the first category relates to directives that are between an individual and God, and in their case, an individual is answerable only to God and not to any government. Hence, no government, for example, can force a person to fast or go for Hajj or Umrah, or to circumcise himself, or to keep his mustaches trimmed, or in the case of a woman to cover her chest, refrain from displaying her ornaments, or to wear a scarf when going out. In other words, it is not as if a list of all religious directives has to be placed before the authorities, which will then make the people abide by them. No one has been given this right of interference in personal matters in the Quran and the Hadith. And please don't say that this kind of enforcement is not prohibited either. The right to enforce a rule is predicated on legitimate authority. Who is anyone to interfere in my personal life? This right has to be established by a legitimate authority first, because you are going to interfere in the lives of other people, interfere in their freedom. For this, you need to present some concrete evidence. If you are unable to do so, I would hold your hand and question you about how you dared to interfere in my personal matters. If a directive of God's messenger has reached a woman concerning the Hajj pilgrimage, she is the one who has to adhere to it. It has to be her decision. If she has violated any directive, at most, you can remind her. That's all. But a government cannot interfere in this matter or legislate about it. If it does, it has to first establish its right to do so. Where has the Quran or the Hadith delegated this right to a government? Hence, to reiterate, no government, for example, can force a person to fast or go for Hajj or Umrah, or to circumcise himself, or to keep his mustaches trimmed, or in the case of a woman to cover her chest, refrain from displaying her ornaments, or to wear a scarf when going out. In all such matters, it has no authority to go beyond urging, education, and persuading people. No scholar, even of the caliber of Imam Abu Hanifa, can go beyond this. In all such matters, it has no authority to go beyond urging, education, and persuading people, except if there is a chance of rights being usurped or excesses being committed against the life, wealth, and honor of people. In other words, if acting on an individual directive on my part causes violation of someone else's rights, the government can intervene, and as I said before, this is the sole right that is established for a government. It can either formulate laws to stop people from usurping the rights of others and committing excesses against them, or to punish the perpetrators. This is the limited domain in which it can operate. If a matter falls in this domain, they have a say. Now, this doesn't mean that a directive related to an individual falls in this circle. It is the sole exception I mentioned just to explain the proper perspective in dealing with such matters. Otherwise, the directives related to an individual are a matter between God and man. No one has a right to interfere in this area. The Quran has explicitly said that among the positive directives of religion, a Muslim government can only demand from them that they offer the prayer and pay zakat if it so wishes. Here again, they are not obligated to make these demands. It has been left to their discretion. Let us try to understand the word zakat. The way zakat has been mentioned in the Quran and then explained by the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, it turns out to be a right of God on the one hand. On the other hand, the object for which it has been established is the welfare of society, and it is thus the right of society. Therefore, a law was passed that zakat will be taken by the state, and if it demands zakat, then it is the right of the state. A right can also be relinquished. For example, there is no tax imposed in Saudi Arabia or the Emirates. You can relinquish any right that you are owed. Just as in the case of a husband and wife, I have repeatedly stated that the Quran has decided the rights of both parties. Now, they are answerable to God about the duties they are supposed to carry out. But if they want, they can relinquish their rights by mutual agreement. There is no prohibition on relinquishing one's rights. So it is the right of the state to demand zakat from the people. And the Quran has bound the state to not impose any other tax on the Muslims without their agreement if zakat is already being taken from them. Now, quite evidently, if the Muslims refuse to pay additional taxes when they are paying the zakat, the state, in response, can ask them to establish the prayer if they are Muslims. The Quran has beautifully combined the two, that is prayer and zakat. That is, if you have secured some concession from the state and you are demanding your rights from them, then this demand can't obviously be based on universally known human rights. We know that there are universal human rights that are demanded on the basis of universal moral principles, also acknowledged by the United Nations Charter and every constitution in the world. But here, you are demanding some special privileges by virtue of being a Muslim. Therefore, it is necessary that you offer the daily prayers. If you don't do this, then you give up the right to demand these special rights. You can then stay calm and let the government do what it needs to do. Some of our scholars have objected to the expression, if it wants, that I have used. This is perfectly correct because nowhere is it said that the government must necessarily do so. The authorities will look at the economic scenario, the global dynamics, and then legislate if it wishes to do so. The Quran says that after this, it is incumbent upon the state to leave them alone and not try to enforce anything on them. It is not just that the right to impose the directives related to personal matters is not established for a government, but more than that, the Quran explicitly mentions only two matters in which it actually has a say. If we fulfill these 2 points, the words of the Quran, فَخَلُوا سَبِيلَهُمْ, that is, leave them alone, leave their paths, imply that the state can demand no more of us. Hence, the Quran has negated this idea of implementing the Sharia in both positive and negative ways. There is no scope left for it. As for the second category of directives, they are anyway meant for a government. So, what is the sense of implementation of the directives that belong to the second category? They have been given to the rulers in the first place. For example, in the first category directives, can we tell someone to implement prayer on himself? We can merely say, offer the prayer or follow the directive of prayer. Even here, the word implementation is meaningless because this directive is addressed to a person. As for the second category of directives, these are only given to a government because it is a government which represents a society in collective affairs. If religious scholars demand from those in authority to obey them, then they certainly will be justified. In fact, it is their duty in their capacity as scholars to make such a demand. This is because the scholars have been given this responsibility in the Quran to urge the people to follow the Sharia, the common Muslims, as well as the authorities. It should be clear that this demand is the demand to follow the Sharia. Implementation of the Sharia is not the right characterization for this demand. This is the place where I highlight the error of the scholars as well as the people who expect Muslim scholars to ignore the collective directives of their religion. They should know they are fighting a lost battle. Sooner or later, they have to accept that this isn't possible. You may be aware that in Pakistan, some religious demands were accepted when secular regimes were in power. Have a look at the Constitution of Egypt, especially when the Muslim Brotherhood's regime has been toppled. You will find that secularism has been intellectually defeated in the Muslim world. Turkey was a bastion of secularism, and even there the matter has come to an end. Secularism is possible in the Muslim world only if the Muslim society en masse declares apostasy, that is, leaves Islam, but until they are Muslims, they will continue to study the Quran and understand their religion. In this religion, just as there are directives related to individuals, there are also directives addressed to the Muslim society. Muslims will raise the demands for the latter directives also. I told you about the TV discussion earlier. In that program, Mr. Imtiaz Alam said that if we cede this right to the state, then a lot of things would have to be ceded as well. But it is not so in Islam, where the sphere of state's authority has been clearly demarcated. The case has already been settled very clearly. There is no question about any government interference in our personal lives. We will resist if such a thing is ever done. What right does the Saudi government have to instruct women that they have to be accompanied by their mahram relatives? This is not a matter of law. The Prophet, peace be upon him, had advised a woman of his time. How a woman today understands and acts upon that advice is her decision. No government can tell her what to do. It is not a job of the government to decide whether women should drive and not, or whether they should be accompanied by a male family member or not. Such rules are baseless and silly. These matters are related to an individual, and they remain between God and the individual. In such matters, one may only try advising, educating, or persuading a person. Thus, the fight in our part of the world is between secularism and Islamism. It is not a fight between Islam and secularism. I have already apprised you about the Islamic position. So, in this fight between Islamism and secularism, Islamism is also bound to be defeated. And more or less, it has been defeated. Secularism also faces defeat. As and when the Muslim societies develop in terms of knowledge and reason, that is, reach their maturity, they will arrive at this very position. This may happen when I am no longer around. No contradiction is seen in this position because the directives related to individuals and the directives related to the society have been clearly separated. Also, the directives related to the Muslim society have to be followed and not implemented. Can you restrict or stop the rulers like Nawaz Sharif or Imran Khan from following their religion despite being Muslims? I'm not talking of implementation, I'm talking of practice. How can you stop them? If you say that they cannot follow their religion after coming to power, you are in fact interfering in his freedom to practice his religion. He is obliged to follow his religion in all situations. You cannot stop him from practicing his religion. Therefore, the correct expression is following the Sharia. And if you pay attention, I have mentioned the directives that the rulers are supposed to follow, and these are basically only 4 in number. Even our classical jurists describe them in the same way. The first of these directives is jihad, which everyone is elated to discuss, and only the government has the right to carry out jihad. Zakat also is the right of the government. This was the issue on which Abu Bakr went to war. So one is jihad against persecution, and the second is to collect zakat. Then there are some crimes whose punishments are stipulated in our religion for the people who commit these crimes after being in a covenant with the Almighty, that is Muslims. Take the example of a person who joins the military. He is subject to certain special laws. As Muslims, we are in a similar covenant of servitude with God. If someone commits theft, it is not merely a theft, but its seriousness goes beyond this. There are some laws concerning this violation. This is the third thing. And the fourth is the establishment of Jumu'ah, Friday congregation and prayer. This is the right of the government. So the list is precise and clear. No one should be worried about the future if these things are accepted. These are the things that have been fixed for us because we have no Pope or God among humans. If a debate ensues on these points, we will stand with those who are against any interference in these matters. Therefore, this entire narrative is meant to stop the interference by the religious scholars. I have enumerated all these points to explain the same thing, but everyone here should understand that there are some directives given to us in our religion. So I have listed the directives that fall in the second category. After the directives given to individuals are set aside, I will not go into the details here because I have spent enough ink upon this elsewhere. I have included all this in my book, Meezan, Islam, A Comprehensive Introduction. What I presented here is a summary of the same. I will only read out these directives here. If you have any questions or need any explanation, I will try to answer. Those of you who want to find out the details can refer to my book along with the lectures I have given to explain it. When I started writing this book, I began with the Sharia portion. Subsequently, I wrote the chapters on beliefs and ethics. A greater part of my life has been spent in explaining the Sharia. Therefore, please look up the details there. This second category comprises the following directives. The first, Muslims will not be subjects of their rulers, but equal citizens. No discrimination shall be made between them in the state system and the laws of the state. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, declared this in his farewell sermon. Their life, wealth, and honor shall hold sanctity, as stated by the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, in his farewell sermon in the words, "Verily your blood, your property are as sacred and inviolable as the sacredness of this day of yours, in this month of yours, in this town of yours. So much so that without their consent, the state shall not impose any tax on them other than zakat." As you see, the state interference has been stopped in the ultimate sense by our religion. If a dispute arises in their personal affairs like marriage, divorce, distribution of inheritance, and other similar matters, then it shall be decided in accordance with the Islamic Sharia. The state has no authority to interfere in these matters. I will distribute my inheritance according to my views. All matters of marriage and divorce will be decided according to my wishes. The state cannot interfere in this. But if a dispute arises, for example, the wife approaches the court or the husband approaches the court, the dispute shall be settled by the court. If a dispute arises in other similar matters, then it shall be decided in accordance with the Islamic Sharia. As for this, the government is being given a directive mentioned clearly in Surah Ma'idah of the Quran. I will give the reference as we move on. The people shall be provided with all the essential facilities for their daily prayers, the fasts of Ramadan and Hajj and Umrah. They will not be forced by the law to submit to any directive which reflects a positive injunction of Islam, except the prayer and the zakat. They will be governed with justice and fairness, and according to the Quranic principle, the affairs of Muslims are run on the basis of their mutual consultation. Conducting matters with justice and fairness is also a Quranic directive. God commands you to hand over the trust to their rightful owners, and when you judge between men, pass this judgment with fairness. Public wealth and assets shall be reserved for the collective needs of the society. These are the directives of my religion, which have been given to the rulers. Their public wealth and assets shall be reserved for the collective needs of the society and shall not be given in private ownership. In fact, they shall be developed and looked after in such a way that the needs of people who are not able to financially support themselves are fulfilled from their income. For a detailed discussion on this point, you can again refer to my book, Meezan. If they pass away, they shall be enshrouded and prepared for burial according to Muslim rites. Their funeral prayer shall be offered, and they shall be buried in the graveyard of the Muslims, the way Muslims are buried. The directives concerning the funeral and burial have also been given to the Muslim society, and they are bound to carry them out. The second point, It shall be the responsibility of the government to organize the Friday and the Eid prayers. These prayers shall be held only at places which are specified by the state. It is not my right to construct a masjid or to convert any public park into a masjid and take over it illegally. This will be decided by the authorities. Their pulpits shall be reserved for the rulers. They themselves will lead and deliver the sermon of these prayers, or some representative of theirs will fulfill this responsibility on their behalf. The ideal scenario would be if the rulers make themselves present, because the Friday prayers are to be conducted by them. In our times, it is even possible to have the same sermon delivered in the entire country and arrange its broadcast everywhere. Thus, there is no need to send an imam everywhere. Within the confines of the state, no one will have the authority to organize these prayers independently. Point number 3, law enforcing departments, that is police, shall be primarily reserved for Amr bil Maruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. These are Quranic terms which mean exhorting people towards established and acknowledged universal virtues and forbidding them from evil through exhortation and persuasion. Here, we part ways with the West. I have explained these terms, Amr bil Maruf and Nahi Anil Munkar, on many occasions. They do not include religious directives. Rather, they cover well-known virtues. For example, forbidding bribery and adulteration. You cannot say that adulteration is my right. Thus, the most pious of people will be selected as workers of these departments. They will urge people to do good and forbid them from all that mankind has always regarded as evil. However, they will only use the force of law when a person is guilty of usurping rights or harms the life, wealth, and honor of people. Please don't ask whether the police are meant to exhort and urge people. With apologies, let me say that every civilized and enlightened police force does this work. They even resolve household disputes. All progressive police departments do this work. They do not just use the baton everywhere. I have written this on the basis of a Quranic verse mentioned in Surah Ali Imran. For a detailed discussion, you can refer to the chapter on dawah, preaching, in my book, Meezan. I have stated that the Quran has directed the authorities to establish a police department, but in reality, its responsibility is to carry out this injunction of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. In those aspects of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, where someone's rights are not usurped or someone's life, wealth, and honor are not harmed, the path of exhortation and permission is followed. The police can do nothing beyond this. Even in the present police system, the cases in which the police are supposed to mediate and resolve the issues, and the cases in which they can lawfully intervene, are clearly defined and decided. Point number 4, the state shall always adhere to justice with regard to its enemies as well. It will speak the truth, bear witness to it, and will not take any step contrary to justice and fairness. So, national interest is not a value over justice. For us, relations with everyone in the world are based on establishing and upholding justice. We have to stand for truth and justice and decide all our matters on this scale. These principles should reflect in our foreign policy. At 2 places in the Quran, God has commanded us to uphold these values in a very strict manner. You can see the detailed discussion in my book Meezan. In fact, I've included them not in duties imposed on the state only, but in the prerequisites of true faith with all the supporting arguments. Point number 5. If the state enters into agreement with someone within its jurisdiction or with some foreign entity, then as long as the agreement exists, it shall be honored, both in letter and in spirit, with full honesty and sincerity. Actually, the world itself is based on agreements and trust. We have entered into agreements with the United Nations. Our affairs with the world function on this principle. Fulfilling pledges, contracts has paramount importance in our religion. I have already placed some examples before you about how the Almighty asked the Muslims to fulfill their contracts, even when the divine punishment had to be executed after the phase of Itmam al-Hujjah. Also, when the Muslims were directed to assist other Muslims who were facing persecution, they were asked not to violate any treaties. If there are any agreements within the state or without, then they shall be upheld in letter and spirit with all honesty and sincerity. Rulers are bound to follow this from a religious perspective. The sixth point, the death penalty will be given in two cases only: murder and spreading anarchy in the land. The world is presently debating the death penalty. We Muslims are standing in light in this matter. Others have to engage in the debate, where they will sometimes take one position only to reverse it later, and sometimes punish the criminals and sometimes become their sympathizers. This happens because, in the words of the Quran, they neither have guidance nor a clear book. Thank God we do have a clear book with us that tells us precisely what to do. We too have done away with the death penalty, except in cases of murder and spreading anarchy in the land. The death penalty cannot be awarded except in these two cases. Further, if a Muslim is guilty of murder, theft, fornication, falsely accusing someone of fornication, that is qadhf, or spreading anarchy and disorder in the land, and a court is fully satisfied that he does not deserve any leniency arising from his personal, familial, and social circumstances, then those punishments shall be meted out to him which God has prescribed in His book for those who have wholeheartedly accepted the call of Islam. Thus, these punishments are only given to those individuals who accept the message of Islam with conviction, but then go on to commit these crimes. These are actually divine punishments and not some worldly punishments where we can debate which punishments are better. The Quran has itself mentioned this in black and white. For example, where it mentions the punishment of theft, the objective is not stated to be merely punishment in retaliation or the elimination of theft from society. Rather, the Quran says, Jaza'an bima kasaba nakalan min Allah, as a reward of their own deeds and as an exemplary punishment from God. In other words, the Almighty is saying, I am God, and this person had entered into a covenant with me. By committing theft, he has violated that covenant, and I will thus make an example out of him in this very world. So, please understand that these punishments are part of the punishments that will be meted out to people on the Day of Judgment, and they have been made mandatory here as well. I have deliberated on this point on a number of occasions, and there is a whole chapter in Meezan discussing the penal sharia of Islam. I have even taught this chapter very recently and presented my evidences there. Point number 7, dissemination of Islam to all parts of this world shall be organized at the state level. We are da'is, or callers to God's religion. We are supposed to promulgate the divine message. If Muslims have their own government, it will disseminate the divine message, just as it is expected to invite people to virtue, and just as our own Pakistani government presently is trying to make peace between two Muslim countries. If any power of the world tries to hinder this effort or persecutes Muslims, for which Islam has given the directive of jihad, then the state, according to its capacity, will try to remove this hindrance and stop this persecution, even if it has to lift arms for it. This is the actual directive of jihad in Islam. The other objectives of jihad, such as fighting oppression and tyranny, stem from this. So this is where I take a different position than the Islamists as well as the secularists. My Lord has given these directives to Muslims in their collective capacity. They have been clearly mentioned in the Quran and have been established by the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We and our authorities have to follow these directives. Therefore, even the word secularism is out of place in our society, and neither are we in need of liberalism. The message of our religion is that this world has not been made for us to impose anything on other people. In fact, God has told His messenger that being the Lord of this entire cosmos, had He willed, He could have made all humans follow a single religion or give them birth in a single religion. He has given this right to humans to choose their religion. Who can dare interfere in this right? So, if we do not exhibit tolerance for each other in the society, we will stand before God as offenders. We have to show tolerance towards other people, and in fact, more than that, warmly accept them as they are and share our message with them. This is our true position where God has placed us.